A lot of people have all sorts of ideas about eating disorders, and it is confusing. But really, there's not one cause. There's not one reason people have eating disorders. There's genetic components. There's the socio-cultural, influences. There could be a trauma, maybe not. There's personality characteristics. There's a whole host of things that really come into, it's called the perfect storm. And each and every person has their own history and own story for why, they eventually have this illness.
Welcome to OTR, Over the Rainbow, Achieving Mental Health for Real. This podcast offers hope to many people who needlessly suffer from mental health issues. Your host, Bob Adelman, brings you information on how you can recover from any mental health issue and achieve a happier life. If you want to know more, please check out his trailer. Bob's notes on today's show follows.
This episode we talked to Dr. Christina Castagnini, who fully recovered from an eating disorder and now gives personal and professional perspectives about struggles with food, weight, and body image. She has 25 years of clinical experience as a licensed psychologist and certified eating disorder specialist.
Now, here's Bob with today's show.
Hello, Christina. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Bob.
I usually ask my guests to talk about themselves and their brand.
So I'm a psychologist. I'm out in California in the Bay Area. And I'm a certified eating disorder specialist and also a podcast host to a show called Behind the Bite Podcast, where I have guests on who either have journeyed through their own struggles with body image and eating disorders, or also have professionals on to discuss eating disorders and body image issues, just so we get both the professional and personal perspectives on the show.
Yes, when I think of an eating disorder, I'm a little bit older, so I think of Karen Carpenter. Mm-hmm. She had a bad problem, and she came to be an advocate for the problem, and I think that helped. But I think it's very important that people hear the message. They can overcome this. It doesn't have to threaten your life. So I just wanted to ask you, because I'm always curious, do you feel that the eating disorder is from a previous type of trauma or something that happened in their childhood, or just inherited?
Yeah, it's really a good question. A lot of people have all sorts of ideas about eating disorders, and it is confusing. But really, there's not one cause. There's not one reason people have eating disorders. There's genetic components. There's socio-cultural, influences. There could be a trauma, maybe not. There's personality characteristics. There's a whole host of things that really come into, it's called the perfect storm. And each and every person has their own history and own story for why, they eventually have this illness.
Right.
And, I'm really glad you brought up the Karen Carpenter thing, because, for people who are maybe not as old as us, 'cause I remember that
old.
too. That's all I knew as well is, Karen Carpenter died of a heart attack from her anorexia nervosa. And that's really, I think, all people knew for the longest time. Right. And so that was kind of unfortunate, because people really didn't understand much other than that. And she kind of became this poster child. But fast forward to now, it's, there's so much more information and so much more known, which is great. Because now, people are talking about bulimia nervosa, binge eating disorder, orthorexia. They're talking about all these things. And, there's still so much more we need to get out there in terms of education, right?
I think mental health in general in the 60s was zero. So any help was a lot of help. Thank God today, even though they don't really talk about this a lot on television, I think there's a lot of podcasts today that talk the truth about the problem and, tell people that they're not crazy, to get the information so people don't suffer needlessly. So could you take us through your story of getting this problem or issue?
Obviously I've gone through my own struggles with, eating disorders, and that's one of the main reasons why I do the work I do in the podcast as well. And people do wonder, like, well, gosh, what happened to you? And I'm pretty open. I've shared my story on the podcast. I think I was very aware of my body very young. I just got the message that something was very wrong with it. I was born with 2 major birth defects. One was very visible on my shoulder, and it was very painful. So from a very young age, I was going to UCSF up in San Francisco, kind of like the guinea pig. I just remember going and having doctors in white coats, like, staring at me and taking pictures. And, for a little kid, having doctors stare at you and kind of touching you and taking pictures, it was pretty traumatic. But also just the message of, like, something's wrong with you. That's why you need to be here. And also people asking all the time, like, did you get burned? What's wrong with you? And always wanting to hide my shoulder so nobody would ask. But I didn't really feel out of control with my body till, and I don't want to, like, perpetuate the myth here that it's, like, just teenage girls who have eating disorders, because that's not the case. But just for me, when I was going through puberty, body felt very out of control. It was just a host of things. It was, like I said, a perfect storm. I moved from one city to another. It was like a culture shock. I had my lifelong friends. My family was all near me. We moved. I didn't know anybody. It was the middle of 5th grade, which was horrible, because I went from a very small school where we'd been with the same class of people from kindergarten on. I went to a very large school where there was, like, multiple classes of the same, like, there was more than one 5th grade. And I had no friends around us. That was hard. And then my aunt decided she wanted to have me in her wedding. We're a big, large Italian family. And the dress was going to be strapless. And, I had this issue with my shoulder. And I'm going, oh, my gosh, there's going to be, like, hundreds of eyeballs on my shoulder. And I was already feeling uncomfortable with my body. So my parents were gracious enough to research into what could be done. There was an experimental surgery that could be done to reconstruct my shoulder, which I decided, yes, I would like to try that. And I was taken out of school for about 6 months. That was also hard because I really was just starting to make friends, and then I was yanked out of school and did this very painful surgery. But so it was just a perfect storm of, like, all these changes, all this stuff. It was hard.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. And I guess an important question also is the loved ones, the parents, the husband, the wife. What do they look for, especially with parents? Because you never, your teenage kids are off and running some other direction. What can they look for to, step in and ask and talk to their child about a problem, if they have a problem or not? I mean, some parents are like, my kids have no problems. They're perfect. But I think that's not a good practice, because if your child is hurting, especially with something like this, that can affect you and kill you, that you have to look out for that. So are there red flags? Is there a way that you would know that your child is affected by this?
Well, I want to say one thing. You can't look at somebody and know if they have an eating disorder. And at that, you can't know which one they have. So oftentimes that's confusing to people. They're like, well, oh my gosh, like, my child looks fine. Like, they don't, they must not have one. They don't look sick enough, or they don't look like they have an eating disorder. And that kind of perpetuates this myth too to other people, to people who have an eating disorder. Like, well, I don't have one. I'm not sick enough. I don't look like I have one, right? Because parents will often say that too. Like, my kid doesn't look emaciated. They don't have one. Or or to discount it the other way, right? Oh, they're just lazy. They just need to stop eating. Right? It's like, no. If someone has an illness, they have an illness, right?
People are quick to blame. They're quick to blame the character of the person. in all mental illness, it's always the character. Like, you're a loser. You're too emotional. You're, something wrong with you. You're stupid. Blah, 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 blah. And especially with ADHD, because we're clueless, it's like we make mistakes all the time. So I think it's just so important that parents pay attention and in some way pick up the problem, because it's critical, literally critical to your child. If they have a eating disorder, you don't want to mess around with it. You want to try to get them help if they can.
Right. They are the number one deadliest mental health illnesses. So to your point, you don't want to just avoid this. And I think what parents can do, as someone with an eating disorder, these are very shameful, secretive, embarrassing illnesses. The worst thing anybody can do is just kind of go up to somebody and be like, hey, what are you doing? What are you eating? Why aren't you eating? How come you're eating so much? Whatever it is, or I've noticed you've lost weight, gained weight. I think any focus on the body, the weight, eating behaviors is going to shut somebody down. They're going to crawl in their hole and just shut down. So I strongly suggest for anyone who's concerned about somebody in their life that they think might be struggling, just to kind of go in the back door a little bit and be like, hey, I noticed, you've been a little bit different lately, or you're isolating, or, you just don't seem yourself. Is everything okay? If you need to talk, just let me know. Just kind of open the door. That's a better way to kind of let the person know, like, hey, I see you're struggling. If you need anything, let me know.
Normally, I don't recommend social media, but there are groups that you can join and talk to people that have your issue. But a lot of social media, I know probably everyone has seen the commercial. In the first 15 minutes, they already got them. They're telling them what to wear and what to do and how they should look. Is there a way to talk to your child about this and make sure that they aren't being influenced or, God forbid, being told that they're not good enough? It's a horrible thing.
Well, the social media is, oh gosh, the problem is the algorithms are such that once you start looking at one thing, then you just keep getting fed more and more and more of the same thing. And these influencers who are touting things like what I eat in a day, or, the kids really, I have a bunch of my case of, they really believe what they see is truth. And the amount of calories that they think is normal is actually starvation mode. And it's awful. And so just educating your kids, maybe even taking some time to be like, hey, show me what's on your feed for TikTok or Instagram. You would be shocked oftentimes to see what they're looking at. And unfortunately, I think in our toxic diet culture, even adults think that what is out there is normal. And so it's really hard to differentiate between what's, quote unquote, like you said, healthy versus unhealthy, and what's toxic and what's not.
Right.
So if you can follow people who are body positive, or health at every size, or intuitive eating, but even at that, sometimes these influencers get sneaky. They put these hashtags in, they're using those words, and they kind of sneak under the radar, saying that they follow those principles, and they really don't. So it's really hard and it's really tough.
Yeah. It's a horrible thing, and all we can do is try to get information to people about the problem, and hopefully they'll pick up on it. How does someone know if he has an eating disorder, or is just being healthy and say, I'm going to eat healthy until I lose enough weight that I look good?
Well, we live in a toxic diet culture, so I think it gets confusing for people, right? What the difference is when I ask people, well, how much of your day is spent thinking about food, thinking about exercise, worrying about your body, worrying about your weight, and they'll say, well, gosh, 80-90% of my day, I can't imagine not thinking about it every minute, right? That's one big clue. But also, if their whole life revolves around making sure they engage in their eating disorder behaviors. And what I mean by that is someone who they'll skip school, or they'll make sure that, like, let's say that they have to go to the gym, like 60 minutes a day, and work out a certain way. So they have to make sure they sweat. If they don't get that 60 minutes in, like, their whole day is ruined. And they earn their food. So if they work out, then they allow themselves to eat. If they work out, then it determines what they eat or don't eat for the rest of the day. It determines their mood for the day. Just like if they weigh themselves several times a day. If the number goes up, they're in a good mood. If the number goes up, they're in a bad mood. They will negotiate. I call it negotiating with Ed. They'll restrict or they'll alter what they eat for the rest of their day. If the number goes down, then they're kind of in a better mood. They may allow themselves permission to eat something a little bit more that day. They'll body check, so they'll look in reflective mirrors, like every time they pass one. It just, so much of their day, their mind frame, their headspace is just revolving around food and their body. So it's all consuming.
Anything else you would like to mention?
So people always ask, like, well, how do we eat then? I think the thing to remember is everybody was born knowing how to eat and how to feed ourselves, right? The whole purpose of food is fuel and nutrition. That's it. It keeps us alive. That's the be all end all. We've made it so complicated. It doesn't need to be that complicated. Like, we don't plug in like a cell phone, right? That's food is what keeps us alive. And so, there's a book called Intuitive Eating. And unfortunately, some people have taken that concept and tried to make it like a diet. Like, oh, if I do this, I'll lose weight. It's not a diet. It's just getting back to the basics and touching base with your body, reconnecting with your hunger signals and satiety signals, and not having food rules. Like, all food's food. There's no good food. There's no bad food. It's just food's food. That's a hard concept for a lot of people.
Yeah, and they throw out food. You walk into a grocery store, you walk into a 7-Eleven or something, and it's all just starch and sugar and bad things, but they taste good. So it's hard not to. It's very tempting. I try to maintain my weight, or I'm trying to lose some weight because I'm overweight. And, my partner brings home some Oreo cookies. I'm done. I can't resist them. I told her, if you do that again, just hide them.
What's wrong with the Oreos, though?
It's hard to
What's wrong with the Oreos?
Oh, I eat too many of them. For me, there's nothing in particularly wrong with it, but I have kind of an eating problem where if I like something, I'll eat the whole thing. Like if I get a bag of potato chips, I'll eat all of them, So there's something, I read something somewhere that some people, if they start eating, it's hard for them to stop. And I think I have something like that. But, I have no problem with Oreo cookies. I think they're great, but 3 or 4 a day, and not 17
but
a day.
See, that's the thing.
So,
like, what you're saying right now is perpetuating this idea that, like, there are good foods, bad foods. I have no control. It's me. And that's the problem, is when people keep reiterating these things, then it's like, oh, I can't be around these foods. And so then when you finally do get around them, you do eat them all, because there's this mindset of like, for every restrictive phase, there is a binge phase. And so I tell people all the time, look, whatever food you tell yourself that about, go and keep them in abundance in your house at all times. Because what happens is when they're around all the time, they don't become that for you. They're just there. And before you know it, you'll be like, oh my gosh, I've had Oreos in my house and I can't remember the last time I had one, because they stop being that for you. You just start to have them around.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I didn't mean to give bad advice.
No, it's not, but it's not your fault. I think that's I hear that so often from people, and they're shocked when I say, listen, go buy like 5 packs of Oreos and keep them in the house.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense what you're saying. I never thought about it that way. And of course, I'm like a stooge. Whatever people tell me on the TV, I believe. So, it's hard. It's dieting of any type. It's difficult. And they say you really shouldn't diet. They say that, you shouldn't have this, regimen of food. Is that something that's a problem, or?
Well, wait, 95% of people who go on a diet go off and they say it quote unquote works. It doesn't work because 95% of people who go on a diet gain the weight back plus more, and the yo-yo diet. Yo-yo dieting is the worst thing you can do for your health and well-being. We know this.
Yeah.
And they're not sustainable. When you go on a diet, they're restrictive. They're not conducive to anything you can do in the long term. Think about when you're on a diet. You can't go to a foreign country on vacation and sustain that diet. You can't do it the rest of your life. You're not going to measure things, weigh things. This is silly. This is not something you can do forever. And so when people say like, oh, it's the only thing that quote unquote worked, I'm like, what worked about that? Like nothing. Like, how do you want to eat the rest of your life? That's what it's
Well, I want to eat all candy, though.
That's okay. It's like,
I don't know.
The thing is, like, I think because people restrict it and they put this in the bad category, it becomes, we as humans want what we tell ourselves we can't have.
Yeah, that's true. I just go for that kind of ice cream. Forget about it. I love ice cream, and I try to regulate that. Like, I won't have more than one ice cream Snickers a day. But are you saying you shouldn't even worry about it? But is that a situation where you would gain too much weight? I don't know. I'm a big eater. I can eat anything, and I don't really get full that often. I think partly because I'm on medicine. And so as far as your diet, what do you recommend to do exactly?
Well, again, I think people just that your question alone is the whole problem with our society. We're always looking for that holy grail of diets, or what should I do? And we stopped remembering that, like, our bodies are going to tell us what we need to do, because some days we have hormonal shifts. Some days we're more active, less active. Some days we're sick and we need more fuel to help ourselves recover. Some days we're more sedentary. We need less fuel. Some days we just want to eat more. Like, we go to a wedding and we have dinner, and then the wedding cake comes, and you're obviously not physically hungry, but like, damn, you want the cake, right? And that's life, right? Like, enjoy the cake. But, if you have an eating disorder, you might say, I can't allow myself to eat that. And if I eat it, I'm going to feel guilty. And then I'm going to make myself pay penance tomorrow and like work out for 2 hours. Like, that's not living, right?
Yeah. All of that, I agree with you. All of that is terrible. You shouldn't torture yourself over food. But the issue is, how do you lose the weight then? But that's the whole, that question right there is our whole problem with our society, is everyone's constantly trying to lose but we
weight.
need to, everybody in the audience wants to know the answer.
But see, that's the problem.
What do we do if you're 100 pounds overweight?
That's what I'm trying to get at. That's the problem. The more people diet, and I'm assuming people listening have been on diet after diet after diet, the more you diet, the more you're going to gain weight over time. That's number one, the problem. Number two, we're so hell-bent in our society about looking like this idealized, unattainable body image that's the dieting beauty industry. It's a $76 billion diet and beauty industry that's like constantly bombarding us with, you can only look like this, right? This is the only body type that people can have to have value, worth, happiness in our society. And that's the body that's healthy,
I think that's not right. I agree with you on that, but in my case, it's a health problem.
But is it?
Yeah, it really is, because I have nerve issues where my feet can't carry the weight.
Okay, so we're going to get into a huge debate here.
No, I love
No,
debates.
we will. I'm serious. No, I'm being serious. I know people who are in small bodies, large bodies, all shapes and sizes of bodies that have pain, neuropathy, hip pain, knee pain, joint, whatever. And it doesn't matter about size. That is put out there as a lie and a myth. Because I just had a podcast about this. we were talking about this myth. I had a pain expert on, and we were talking just about this. People are constantly told, if you lose the weight, the pain will go away. And you know what? That's a lie, because I have people in smaller bodies who have the same pain, and they're not told that.
Oh,
you know?
Okay, all right.
So that's
All right,
a
I'm
huge
told
myth.
all the time. My son constantly says to me, "Oh, if you lost weight, you wouldn't feel it. You wouldn't have a problem." He says that. I mean, it's logical to think that way, at least. But I mean, there is a spectrum. Like, I knew a guy that went, crazy eating, and I mean, he died from it, basically. I mean, I know a lot of people, like my brother-in-law just recently died, and he was always overweight. I don't know if you could relate the two, but I think you could with the first one. I mean, he couldn't walk and breathe. So that's a situation that needs attention in some way, but probably through a doctor more than anything.
Yeah, but what you're talking about is outliers, right? So, like, let's look at it conversely, right?
Right. Yeah, they're outliers. Yeah, I agree.
But let's look at conversely, right? Like, and I said, like, eating disorders are the number one deadliest mental health illnesses, right? So let's take somebody who is like genetically predisposed to be in a larger body, right? And that's where they're healthy. So in our medical field, we're biased. So let's say someone is genetically, physically, like their labs are good. They don't have hypertension. They don't have cholesterol problems. They don't have diabetes.
But this guy had everything. He had diabetes. He had heart condition. Yeah.
Say, like, there are many people who are in larger bodies. Notice we're talking about health at every size. They are in larger bodies and they don't have any health issues. They're fine. And they move and they're fine. And they don't have eating disorders. They're just fine. But people, doctors especially, will have this weight bias, and they are just like, you must be overeating. You must not be exercising. You must be lazy. You must have problems. I'm going to send you for labs. And the doctors are shocked that there's nothing physically wrong with them. It's like, what? I don't understand this. Well, eat less, exercise more. Wait, I'm eating just fine. I'm moving enough, right? But then you get somebody who...
This particular guy was very ill. Yeah.
Right. And again, we could go to like, okay, and I'm getting that, but like, let's just say that this person who's physically well and healthy, right, listens to this advice and says, fine, I'm going to start restricting. I'm going to start over exercising. And they exercise and diet themselves or whatever, starve themselves literally into a smaller body that they're not genetically supposed to be in, right? Now the doctors and everyone's praising them. Oh my God, you look amazing. You're great, right? And this is typical. Now they're in a smaller body, but now their cholesterol sky high, because when you have anorexia nervosa, many people have high cholesterol. Now they have bone density issues because they are lacking enough, calcium and nutrients for their bones. Now they have not been eating enough, so their hair's falling out. Their EKG's off. Maybe they're high risk for a heart attack. They're malnourished. They don't have energy.
I mean, that's the other end of the spectrum, but it is, I think, a spectrum to the point where this guy literally ate himself to death. I mean, he would take food and move to another table so only he could eat it. He had problems like that.
But now you're talking about something else. So again, you're talking about eating disorders.
That might be a mental issue, yeah.
But now you're talking about if someone's using food, whether it's anorexia nervosa or binge eating disorder, if someone is turning to food and eating beyond the point that they need the food for hunger and satiety and for physical nutrition and like to stay alive, it sounds like your friend or whoever you're talking about was using food to cope, to numb out as a way to escape life, or, it sounds like...
I'm sure he was.
Right. And so that's where...
I agree.
That's where somebody needs to come in and see a specialist and say, like, what's your relationship like with food? Are you eating out of the physical tank or the emotional tank?
Right.
Is food serving a purpose other than fuel and nutrition? And that's what the definition of an eating disorder is. And that's why I said they're the deadliest mental health issues, because if you're using food in a way or engaging with food for reasons other than fuel and nutrition to a point where it's compromising your physical health and well-being, there are going to be physical consequences, whether it's, again, starvation and malnourishment and heart attacks and things like that, like to the point where someone's malnourished, they're restricting so much, because when you don't eat enough, you don't feel emotions. When you're eating too much and you're binging, you're numbing out, you're dissociating, you don't feel emotions. So both ends of the spectrum, people are checking out, right?
Yeah. But I'm not real, I'm just playing devil's advocate, but back in COVID days, they always said, person's overweight, that's why he died. I mean, was that an exaggeration? I mean, I don't know. I know my uncle was very young and he was very big. Again, you're saying that's probably in the food disorder department, right? I mean, a normal person does not have to worry about those things. Is that a good definition of what we're trying to say? Or,
well, again, each and every person's unique, and I can't tell by looking at anybody their state of health.
Right.
I think the problem is that there is a weight bias in our society and in our medical world that says if you're in a larger body, you're lazy, you're unhealthy. And that's not the case. Right?
No, it's not true. Yeah. I agree with you 100%. I just don't want them to say, oh, no way I'm going to diet because Bob told me that it's okay to just eat as much as I want. But is that fair? I mean, I enjoy arguments, but I don't want to offend anyone at this point.
No, and I think the thing is, though, it's not about going on a diet, though. It's about understanding why you're eating, when you're eating, and getting rid of the food rules and saying, like, I need to understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. Like, am I using food for things that, to numb out, to distract myself? And really, I think the pressure to be off of people to say, like, because I'm in a larger body, there's this pressure to diet. Because certainly there are people in smaller bodies that eat an enormous amount of food.
Right.
But just genetically, they're predisposed and, like, they're not in larger bodies. And that's, everybody's different, right? And so I think we demonize people and kind of assume things about them and put labels on them, and that's not fair.
Right. Okay. I mean, that's a very good argument, and I know what I'm beating.
No,
I mean, I enjoy it.
Hard.
If we don't argue, but
it's hard.
It's very hard for someone who grew up on commercials in the 60s. It's like, I know jingles. I can't remember my name, but I know jingles from 1962.
Right? And they're getting stuck in your head.
They brainwash you. There's no doubt you're brainwashed because every product you buy, you have to be familiar with it from TV. I mean, if you go out and buy XYZ toilet paper, you're going to be like, I don't know this brand. Is it any good? I don't know. But I saw this one on TV. It must be good. So, all right. You've been a great guest. I love to, get into these discussions so we can finally get the right answer at the end. Hopefully the truth. Although it's very hard to get the truth, as we know, but, I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. Hopefully I didn't offend you with anything. Do you have any other things that we might have missed that you'd like to talk about?
No, I just think it's great you're open to having guests on, and I know a lot of the things I say. Even I tell my patients when they start working with me, they're going to look at me sideways because, like, a lot of the things we talk about, they're like, "What?" Because it's so counter to all the messaging that's been out there for decades and decades. And I think the more that look, I don't have $76 billion to go out there and, like, neither do me and my colleagues. Like, we just don't. We're going to be these quiet little voices that sound a little like off. But I think the more of us that start speaking out, hopefully things will start to shift and change. And I see a little bit of movement there.
I think these podcasts are vital to the health of the nation. I mean, that's why I started up. Well, basically I started up because when I was 11 years old in 1970, I didn't have anything at all. And I didn't know why I was washing my hands for 2 hours. I didn't understand anything. And my parents were clueless. They're World War II parents, so you're either nuts or you're good. the binary states. And, that's why I started it. I think that's kind of what you are doing it for as well. We have to get a message out to these 11-year-old kids that you're not bad. You're not crazy. You're not different. You're part of a group that is maybe different than another group, but they're not bad groups. Everybody's important. So that's the kind of message I like to give.
Awesome. You're doing great work. So glad you're open to things and getting words out there.
It's hard. It's hard to do it, but it's harder not to do it. So there you go. I love most of it. I have a problem before I do these. Once I'm doing them, I'm fine. But before I do interviews, I get super nervous.
Oh.
Yeah, super nervous. Doesn't matter who's coming. I could have Porky Pig coming on, and I'll be nervous. It's just the way my body has figured out how I'm going to get dopamine to get through the interview. Because if I'm just normal, maybe I don't have enough energy or wit So I have become like a dopamine addict. I did it at work. I'm doing it now. Because I never fit in at work. I was always the oddball at work because I had severe ADHD. I didn't know what the heck's going on. People would be like, yeah, that's easy. And I'd be, no, it isn't. I can't do it. I try to write a sentence without making a mistake, and I can't. It doesn't go from the brain to the paper. So it's, I'm doing whatever I can do, and I appreciate you doing what you do because I think everybody should do something. I think we have a lot of work to do. And I think COVID woke us up. It was a wake-up call. And I hope that things progress as they are now because I think we've come a long way.
I hope we just keep moving forward. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.